Hello everyone, my name is Olasupo Shasore and welcome to afriQatlantic. In this podcast, we're going to be talking about history, the hidden backstory of history. We want to talk about Africa's diaspora and its legacy. Well, let's never get it wrong. African diaspora is today a positive thing, a thing of immense value on both sides of the Atlantic. We're seeing a lot more African-centeredness on the landscape. Increasingly, particularly due to our creative powerhouses, well, in contrast to when Africa's creativity was just European and American-based, we're exporting ideas more than we are importing ideas. It's all because Africans are now far too important to Atlantic history to be ignored. And yes, African history doesn't start with slavery, but it's a good context to start with. African diaspora speaks to the multiple, frequently overlapping diasporas. And therefore, we struggle to find one unified identity. It's now a feeling of ness, a feeling of Africanness. Let's go way back. I've always been in marvel of a story. The story I tell briefly in my 2014 book, Possessed. Possessed was about the history of a crown colony called Lagos. The story is one of true British ingenuity in sensing the precious moments in history. And therefore, I like the story of James Somerset. This story is about the hidden story, the backstory, and that's what we like to do in afriQatlantic. Somerset was a young African, black African. He had been bought and then brought to England by his masters. But the thing is that he hopped it, he escaped. But sadly for him, he was recaptured. Once his master was alerted, he was held on board a ship for return to America. In the meantime, Somerset, and that's not his real name, he probably had an African name. In the meantime, Somerset had acquired English godparents. While in England, they applied for his release and to secure his physical production in court. The court application came before a judge on the King's Bench, and that's what they call it, courts in these days. The question was to determine the legality of Somerset's imprisonment by reason of being a slave. And so, in 1772, the great Lord Mansfield, otherwise known as William Murray, a commercial judge of growing and towering stature, refused to accept slavery as a legitimate status. He didn't accept that slavery was legal. And don't forget, his own niece, Dido Bell, was one of mixed race, a daughter of a slave that lived with him. No, not lived with him like that. Lived with his family. At least we think that was what was going on. Mansfield said, the state of slavery is such that the nature that it is incapable of being introduced on any reason. It must be erased from memory. In fact, he's reputed to have said, the air of England is too pure an air for a slave to breathe. He ordered that the slave be released. And that's how Somerset got to England. Now you multiply that story by 12.5 million, and then you can see what dimension diaspora was. We now know the facts. For over 200 years, 12.5 million people were subjected to the inhumanity of slave trade, with devastating results. West Africa alone accounted for a devastating 2/3 of this population. And so the population of West Africa was depleted, and that's what diaspora, the dispersal of these people, brought about. And they were flung to the far corners of South America, New Americas, and North America. but now called the United States. And then the establishment of colonies was the product, if not the objective behind the slave trade. And the economic benefit was everywhere to see. In Europe, not the least of the beneficiaries. This inhumane treatment was opposed by the rich people of the day, and many people said, the anti-slavery movements must stop. So let's talk about the mother. And that's what I like to call where all diaspora came from when we're talking about Africans, the mother continent. And so even though before then, but especially since then, the mother continent has over the ages been through several cycles of human migrations to different corners of the world. They traveled carrying with them, their African identity. They traveled by foot, ship, and sometimes, depending on why they traveled by any means possible. Sometimes freely, and most times in captivity. Sometimes they didn't even need to travel to influence the world. As a result, the African continent and its people have had several diasporas all over the world, meaning the influence of Africa is indeed all over the world. Sometimes these African people became founders in new frontiers or unwilling subjects, guests in strange places, most times agents of development and change, proud new citizens, however they got there, either through voluntary work by reasons of circumstances of climate or brutal voyages. These travelers also took with them their own civilizations, their way of life, literally leaving a trail of evidence that points to their origins. We can follow these trails and find the connection between sometimes unwitting users of African heritage and culture. Perhaps the world is one big Africa. Traveling through time to locate the continuity of the African spirit from within Africa, we can explore and locate Africa all over the world, finding where the spirit of Africa lives today and discovering these connections is a fantastic pastime. Let's do so. The people, the way of life, we can see the shared continued traditions in worship and celebration between Africans of the world, from South Africa, Brazil, etc., to Caribbean, United Kingdom, Europe, and Africa. You see the commonality of worship in many of these places. The constant threads of similar practices. Black people, their way of life, and its adoption by others proves the diasporas, and it proves they're influencing into the future. What did they say? There are English words whose origins are, wait for it, yes, African. Banana, banjo, chimpanzee, kola, ebony, fanimoras, impala, jazz, mojo, okra, shear, tango, tilapia, zombie, and so many more. Are they moving to the beat? Samba, the Latin American festive dance, right? That dance, the Rio Carnival, that festive dance. Well, wrong. The dance and the drumming customs are very much West African, developed in the favelas of Rio de Janeiro, where many of the diaspora grew. It's a typical African freestyle, drum-guided gyration. And the dancer dances at the rhythm with or without a partner, with traces of the same style found in West Indies, Louisiana, and still parts of West Africa today. We can continue to explore more of these trails of music and dance. What are they tasting? The transatlantic food trail from Africa to the Americas, the food trail. And we're not just talking chitlins and cornbread. From Argentina to Nova Scotia or Kigali to Kingston, the practice of seasoning of fish, meat, vegetables was distinctly West African and that traveled across the Atlantic. The spices are traceable because they're unique to these areas till present day. In Ivory Coast, Atioko, Sierra Leone, and Bonto. Forgive me when I get some of these wrong. Nigeria and Cameroon, Dawa Dawa. Gambia and Senegal, Funtungen. Witnessed the bush hen, called the guinea fowl, as it traveled from West Africa to assume its place on the dinner tables of the rich and royal in England and Europe. We can follow the great story of African rice, not to be confused with the supposed early rice of China. Rice was grown in Africa long before it could have been introduced to East Africa from the Indian Ocean. Witnessed central Niger Delta, Gambia, and Sokoto cultivations. Much of the world's rice culture owes its origins to Africa. You know, in southern Nigeria, they say Usman Dan Fodio created a jihad and brought Islam to West Africa. But it's wrong. Islam came to southern Nigeria from Mali. So it came from the west coast, not from the Arabs. The northern Nigerians got Islam from the Arabs. The southern Nigerians got Islam from Mali, where Mansa Musa had in 1330s gone to Mecca and scattered the economic conditions of Mecca because he brought far too much gold, created a glut. He was one of the richest men in the world. That's why today, I don't know who speaks Yoruba here, Yoruba people call Muslims Imale, which is a corruption of a Mali man, a Mali. So a lot of these things are confused because we see the commonality. But rice didn't come to this part of Africa from China. Tea didn't come from there either. We were growing tea here. Lemongrass is a tea. If you shred it and boil it, it becomes very similar to tea leaves. But sometimes we don't even bother cutting it. We just put it in the pot and boil it, and then we use the froth. So food is a very good way to study history because people carry food with them. Even if you don't physically take the food, you will look in the bush or the jungle for the plant that you recognize from home. Sometimes they take the plant with them. And in the case of Brazil, when you could buy your freedom as a slave, the returnees didn't return and come and stay forever. They would return and go back. So they would go back and take things that people had asked them to bring. And those things then began to grow there. Everything you have is in your head. What they couldn't do was take what was in your head. Worship, song, language, food making was in your head. So they strip you of everything else and even try and discourage your language speaking. And they succeeded over generations. But the smell of what you knew as a child and the practice of making the food never went away. We went to the Caribbean and they were making amala for us. And then we were like, where the hell did you get this from? Antigua. And we said, okay, we'll have some. And it was damn sweet. They kept the practice of pounding cassava over the years. They would grow it till it was dry. They would sun it till it got very dry and flaky. And then they would pound it with water and then it would become pasty. And then they'll add hot water. Slightly different way, but the result was the same. Are they looking familiar? What's Africanity? Well, the fabric map of Africa also reveals its antiquated history and its influence on the world. The trans history of the world is seen in the global material, the culture and dress. Despite the overbearing culture emulation of the Western suits and dresses, Africa still brings Guinea brocade, cotton prints, the dashinki, the kaftan, and glorious headgears. And don't forget the wrap dress. The wrap dress became a fashion item. It was based on the African way of our women wrapping their loincloths. And it became a fashion item, I think, made famous by DDF. And the runways of New York, people were paying millions of dollars for this new design. It was hardly new. The first wrap dress was probably found about 5,000 years ago in an Egyptian tomb. It clearly also has East and West African echoes of the wrap dress in the Iro of the West Africans and the Rapa, the Lapa of the East Africans. And so the style of Africanity and Africanity in style, its sheer influence is everywhere, from the cornrows hairstyle, which in my part of the world they call koulese, or to the origins of earrings. The wearing of earrings was an African adornment. It was hardly European. And so Africa's influence across the globe is confirmed in the diasporas. The diasporas belong to history. In exploring these connections and these connectors, we can remap the world. At the same time, we can have a lot of fun. So thank you for hanging with us. Don't forget to follow us at Spotify/afriQatlantic, or visit my website www.olasuposhasore.company, or visit www.karamu.com. Send us feedback to qpod@karamu.com. We'd love to hear from you. Until next week, goodbye.